Hello, everyone. My name is Frida Weisel, and I'm a New York City, Brooklyn-based Jewish YouTuber with an interest in all things Jewish subcultures, religion, New York City, and human interest stories. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the ways that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Recently, for instance, there's been a number of YouTube videos that have gotten millions of views, and they depicted the Orthodox Jewish community with subtle and not so subtle anti-Semitic overtones. Jews were depicted as at once controlling the world, but also being so impoverished that they're destroying America. You all know, I think, or many of you know what I'm talking about. I want to have a more nuanced conversation about what anti-Semitism is, because I think there's anti-Semitism and there's criticism, and it's important to differentiate and understand the two. Today, I'll be speaking about historical and contemporary anti-Semitism with Doran Shafrir from The Easy Way. The Easy Way is an English language YouTube channel that makes complex philosophy and geopolitics accessible with a focus on Israel, moral theory, and cultural divides. It features deep dive analysis and interviews aimed at fostering nuanced understanding. Obviously, this is my kind of thing, and so I look forward to this conversation. Before we begin, I want to say I'm trying really hard to get to 500 channel members because that will give me a little bit of relief from worrying about the algorithm. Right now, we're at a little bit under 400. If you're able to be a channel member, I thank you so much for your support. And Doran, or is it Doran? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, actually, both attempts I would classify as correct in English. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here.
Well, it's quid pro quo because I was on your thing, which was my great pleasure and honor.
Well, about time, I guess, right? It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a year. It's been a year. Let's begin by just asking the question, how would you define what anti-Semitism is?
Here's the thing, Frida, I really can't. And I want to tell you why I can't. So here's the thing. When we think about anti-Semitism, especially when the average American thinks about anti-Semitism, he thinks about the Holocaust, right? This is how we are conditioned to think about this. So the anti-Semitism of the Holocaust is a very specific kind of anti-Semitism. And also the term has been coined somewhere around that time, right? A few decades earlier. So it's a racial anti-Semitism, right? It's a racial thing against Jews. It's viewing the certain group, the Jews in this instance, through the lens of what is contemporary. And at the time, right, people were thinking in racial terms. And so anti-Semitism was a racial term. And so people today might believe that Jews control the White House, that Jews control banking, that Jews get special loans. All they have to do is go to the bank and whisper to the Jewish teller, heter iska, right? So this is what people think, but they're not racists, right? You can think these things without being racist. Well, you don't have to be racist to believe that there is a group who, okay, I'll give you an example. Think about the people who are very critical and fearful of Islam. You could be critical and fearful of Islam without being a racist, right? You just conceive this ideology or religion or however you want to decide it. You have a certain conception of it in your head, and that conception is what you are obsessive towards or criticizing. Or, you might think that it's not just to criticize Islam and then you would say obsessive, or you might think that it is just and then you would say rational. But whatever your stance is, you could concede that there is no need for racism here.
Okay, so let's define racism here for a second, because I think you're not using racism in the general sense we use it in popular vernacular, which is just like, actually, if you're an Islamophobe, to use a term, then we think that's racist.
Okay, so let's define racism in the context of anti-Semitism. In the years in which anti-Semitism rose, racism was a scientific worldview. It was a descriptive worldview of how human societies organize and how human societies run. So when I say racist in the context of anti-Semitism, what I mean is that you truly believe that there are certain genetic inherent characteristics in a Jew that make him more prone to have certain maybe undesirable behaviors or undesirable physical traits. Or, even if you were to go to modern times, there's even a pretty popular modern author, I forgot his name, but he essentially reintroduced racism, anti-Semitic racism. I'll give you an example. His main claim, and it's very popular in far neo-Nazi circles, which there are not so few of, but he would say that there has actually been evolutionary selective pressure on Jews to be manipulative and go into banking and stuff like that. I'll try to explain it. For example, he would say that because you were always a minority and you were always persecuted, then you had to develop certain characteristics of being able to be very brutal and very scheming and very controlling. And over time, because you have bred within this population, it has become an inherent trait of the Jew, right? So this is racist anti-Semitism. Islamophobia does not fit that.
I
right?
see. So when you speak of racism, you're talking about a genetic predisposition of a specific population to certain negative stereotypes as a prejudice. So if I think all people of this and this culture are genetically predisposed to, let's say, be scheming liars, that's a racist prejudice. So it's exactly a genetic component.
It's scientific racism. That's what it started out as. Okay, and they had this whole thing about, well, we can measure that by the skull, right? All the famous spiel. So this is how it started. Today, you can hold all these beliefs without being racist. And thus, because we tend to identify anti-Semitism with racism, that person would say, I'm not an anti-Semite. I simply observe certain things, right? But if we really, but if we really think about it, this racial anti-Semitism was a relatively, if we think about the history of the Jewish people, it was a relatively brief period of expression of anti-Jew sentiment. What was it, like 100 years? 100-something years, right? But Jew hatred existed before that, and it wasn't from scientific racism. Jew hatred exists today. It's not from scientific racism. So I ask you, I don't know what anti-Semitism is. Does historical hatred of Jews before scientific racism also qualify as anti-Semitism? I don't know. You tell me. Does hatred of Jews today? Well, I don't even want to say hatred, because it doesn't necessarily have to be hatred. If maybe you believe that Jews control the White House and the finance and you don't hate them, you just you think to yourself, well, I respect them, but I want to counter that. That, for example, is what Nick Fuentes does and says. He doesn't say, I hate the Jews. He says, this is reality. He describes reality as he thinks it is, and he just wants to change that situation. Is he an anti-Semite? Well, not according to the scientific racism definition, right? So we need to define, I don't know if we even need to define anti-Semitism. We can walk through it, because Jews have always been, let's try to take some of the anti-Semitic thinking that we see today and see where it fits the Nazi classic anti-Semitic thinking, and where it doesn't fit, right? So I've shown that it doesn't fit because it's not racist. It is sometimes racist, but mostly it's not racist. It's not a very prominent idea. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, okay, I hear.
Yeah, okay. But here's where it's very similar. Here's the thing. Jews are a people, right? And by them being a people, you might think to yourself, as a non-Jew, or even as a Jew, you might think to yourself, well, because they're a people, they will always have dual loyalty. And I can never be sure where their loyalty lies. And they have a point, to be honest. I mean, you're speaking to me right now. What connects us?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what Hitler would have called the international Jew, or international Jewry. right? So you can have these beliefs without being a racist. Hitler thought that there was an underlying racist explanation, a racial explanation to this phenomena. But today, people believe that. It's quite widespread, actually, right? Think about how many Jewish influential people are essentially being blamed for having their loyalty to Israel and not to the United States. Why? Because they're a Jew. And as a Jew, they belong to a people, and that people has a nation state, and thus you are not loyal. This is also the thinking of the Nazis. This is what the Nazis thought as well, and also this is what the Russian Tsar thought, even back before that. So here we have an example. There is also classical, shall we say, Christian anti-Semitism, which I don't know if we should even define as anti-Semitism, but because, for the sake of discussion, let's just call every anti-Jewish sentiment, let's just call it anti-Semitism, okay? So the Christian anti-Semitism would be Jews are Christ killers, right? Jews did not accept God when he revealed himself, and all that. Now, this is a bit more complicated because you can think about it. For example, if I think back to the Black Death, right? The Black Death was like 600 years before scientific racial anti-Semitism. Jews were still blamed, right? They have this secret cabal. They poisoned the wells. I don't know what they're doing. It was before the Protestant Reformation, by the way, and the Catholic Church was officially against blaming the Jews. But, the mind does one thing and the hands do another thing. So does this count as anti-Semitism? There are many reasons. Okay, so the Jews are the bankers, and the Jews are the other, and the Jews are not one of us, obviously, right? And there's classical Muslim anti-Semitism, you might even say. But it expresses in a different way. Because for the Muslims, the Jews have rejected both prophets. They wouldn't say that we killed God, A, because they do not believe Jesus was God, and B, because they do not believe Jesus was killed. But they do have, in their holy book, in the Quran, they do have prescriptions of what do you do with the Jews, right? So right off the bat, I can tell you that I believe it is in the first or the second Sirah, Jews are going to hell. Okay, Christians as well, but they're going to hell. Why? Because they do not accept the prophet, of course, the prophet of God, Muhammad, the last prophet. And you have a very specific prescription of how you deal with the Jews. You subjugate them, and you make them pay the jizya, which is like a special tax that you pay if you're a Jew or a Christian living under Muslim land according to Muslim law. Now, there have been periods in which this was a pretty good life for a Jew compared to what was happening in Christian Europe, but there were also periods where this was not good at all for the Jews, right? So I guess, does this count as anti-Semitism? Does the belief that if you have a Jew living under your rule, he has to submit and pay a certain tax, a special a Jew tax, is this anti-Semitism? You see, it's more complex than it seems. And I can think of another example. After the Spanish Inquisition, for example, when it happened in Spain, in Portugal, something interesting has been going on, and they actually passed laws that say, that there is some benefit to blood. Like a non-Jew can't marry a Jew even if the Jew converted into Christianity, because they have like a bad blood. I think the name of the law was something about blood, the blood laws. Now, you could say, okay, is it racist? You might be tempted to say yes, but then we have to remember, no, back then they were not thinking in terms of race, right? They were thinking in terms of the salvation of your soul, if we are to put ourselves in the head of the Inquisition. And thus, what I'm afraid of as an inquisitor, what I'm afraid of is that if a Catholic marries a Jew who converted, well, how do I know that this Jew really converted? Maybe he still practices his evil, secret Jewish, rituals, and he is now, damning his babies or damning his wife to damnation because they are not accepting the correct faith. So, does this count as anti-Semitism, or is it just a concern for the eternal soul of the Portuguese?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. For instance, I've spoken to several people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are a religious subgroup that believes very strongly that anyone who doesn't accept their particular beliefs is going to be doomed to some kind of there's going to be an end times, I believe. I don't remember exactly, but what's interesting is that they have a very strong sense of obligation to inform others and recruit others to ensure that they don't end up damned, which we're allowed to say the word damned, right? People are going to leave comments about this. But anyway, but in this case, it's like in the literal sense. We're not using it in a colloquial term. Literally, a person will be subjugated to hell if they don't follow the path of Jehovah's Witness. So if someone believes that a different faith will cause eternal damnation to those of the different faith, is that a racism, or is that a prejudice, or is that just a faith that someone has? I think pretty much all faiths, or most faiths, especially not modern faiths, believe that there's one path and all other paths lead to some kind of hell, or are not the right path, right? So I'm just, what I'm saying is, yeah, I'm just saying what you are saying makes sense to me. To me, it is not racist, or it is not a prejudice per se to believe my faith is the right faith and your faith leads down the wrong path.
Yeah, but you could say the same as, well, if I were an Islamist, then maybe thinking of a plan to, I don't know, lead to the downfall of America within the next 100 years, could you really blame me? I really think that this is what is best for America and best for the world, right? So could you blame me? It's my faith.
Yeah, that's the line. That's the question. You have to be able to coexist with other people who have the same singular, I am right, you are wrong, and to allow for these different I am right, you are wrongs to exist without impinging on each other's beliefs.
So it's very American of you to say. As someone who centers his thinking mainly on the Middle East, my answer to that would be different. My answer for that would be, you have to make sure that you're strong enough and then live and let live. Because if you're not going to be strong enough, you might let live, but you will not live.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When you say the Middle East, do you mean Israel per se?
Well, yes, but also not exclusively. We can think of many such examples in the Middle East who've had similar problems, say the Kurds or the Yazidis, or even the Shia under Sunni majority, right? Or the Sunnis under Alawite minority, if we were to take the Syrian example of the Ba'ath party of the last several decades. So really, we tend to hyper-focus on Israel. It is the case for Israel, but it's not just Israel.
I see. Okay, so back to the concept of anti-Semitism. You really muddled the waters, which was not what we were going to do here. We were going to put things in comfortable boxes. And
what I want to do, is, I'm confusing you kind of on purpose so that you have to think for yourself. So we do see that it's not that simple. And then when people deny being an anti-Semite, even if you happen to think that they clearly are anti-Semites and then deny it, now you can understand why they deny it, because they're not racists, or because they're extreme leftists and they're saying, well, I'm anti-Nazi. Actually, if anyone here is racist, it's the Jews. Because the Jews are, passed by blood. Judaism is passed by blood in a sense. So if anyone is racist, it's the Jew. And you can see it both in left-wing circles and in right-wing circles. I'll give you examples, right? For the left-wing circles, Israel, the Jewish state, is a racist state. And I'm not going to say like if it's true or false, right? I'm just pointing a fact.
Right.
For the left, it's a racist state. Would you agree with that?
Right. Well, explain why. Explain why they think that.
Because they would say
thing, because it's a people determined by blood.
Mostly by blood. I'll give you an example. Why can't an Arab person whose grandparents lived in Jerusalem, okay, and let's say that now he's in Jordan, why can't he live in Jerusalem? But Shlomo from New York, whose entire family has not touched foot in the Holy Land in thousands of years, he can go and live in Jerusalem and become a citizen. Why? Because he belongs to a certain race and the Arab does not, right? So that would be the Jews are racist case, okay?
But Jews are not a race.
Well, okay, you're saying that, but I'm presenting the opposite case, right? You're presenting the counter, and I don't want to go down the counter. I want to present the opposition.
No, I want to know, do the leftists think that Jews are a race?
I don't want to overly, simplify their position, but they would say that, yes, mostly it is a race. Mm-hmm. Because it's mostly passed by blood. You would say, yeah, but you can convert, but that's not the majority of cases. The majority of cases are passed by blood.
I see. Okay.
And
Thanks
so
for clarifying.
And so on the neo-Nazi, more extreme right-wing side, they would say the Jews have an ethno-state, they would call it, right? Which kind of means a racist state. But they are somehow, by sinister means, they are preventing us from having an ethno-state because they are trying to flood us with immigration and thus, genocide the white race. That's what many of them would claim, right? So either way, the Jews are racist. And by the way, the Nazis also thought the Jews are racist.
How so?
In the exact manner that they are judging themselves. The Jews judge themselves by blood. Uh-huh. So why shouldn't we? And also, all they could see is race. So everything was analyzed through race in their perspective. Now, interestingly, both the extreme right wing and the extreme left wing would be anti-Zionists because of that. And again, I'm not trying to make this a political discussion. I'm only stating facts. So for the left, of course, Israel, the Jewish state, would be the one racist state. Right, the one racist state. No, well, I guess they could say that America is also, fundamentally racist or something, structurally racist, right? They might say, but the one explicitly racist country they would say is Israel. And
why not Muslim countries?
Because Muslims are. Oh, we didn't even get to the Muslims. For Muslims, there isn't even such thing as a race. I mean, there is, but as a good Muslim, you're not supposed to have such thing as a race.
What about for leftists? Why would leftists call Israel a racist state and not a Muslim country a racist country?
Because of the law of return, mainly, but because of the example I just gave about the guy going to live in Jerusalem. You can't have such an example for Egypt, right? If you were to take the Shahada tomorrow and become a Muslim, it doesn't mean you can move to Cairo.
Uh-huh.
And also, who wants to move to Cairo?
That's not a very good argument, though.
Yeah, I was just being sarcastic and added that. So, but yeah, so you can get a citizenship and benefits as an Israeli based purely on your blood, right? That's what they would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so thus, you could jump for all sorts of conclusions from that and say, yeah, so Israel kind of needs to not exist. But you could reach the same conclusion from different reasons if you were an extreme right wing from the neo-Nazi circles. Because you would say something like what Hitler said, which was that if the Zionists were to succeed, of course, Hitler did not see them succeed, but he knew that such a thing existed. If the Zionists were to succeed in establishing a Jewish state, since Jews as a race cannot build a country, and we can get back to that in a minute as to why they cannot build a country, and you might see some hints of that even in the conversation today. But since Jews cannot build a country, that means that, Israel, he didn't know the name was going to be Israel, but the potential Jewish state was just going to become an Organisation Centrale, a headquarters of world Jewry, right? That's what Israel was going to become. Now, tell me, Frida, here's an interesting thing. If Israel is like the headquarters of a criminal Jewish organization, does that maybe ring a bell about some maybe very anti-Semitic, although they wouldn't say they're anti-Semitic people, claiming that Israel is a safe haven for pedophiles who run away from the US into Israel, or that, someone gets in trouble with the law and he just runs to Israel and is immune? Does all this ring a bell maybe as Hitler saying that it's essentially the headquarters of the international Jewry, which is essentially a criminal organization hell-bent on the destruction of everything else?
So it's essentially a lot of right-wing. Yeah. Is that a right-wing kind of conspiracy?
Yeah, but it would drip into the left as well. That's the thing. They kind of feed off each other in a sense, because today even the extreme right wingers would say that Israel is racist, and they would use the same argument as the extreme left, and the extreme left would say that Israel is, I don't know, a controlling the banks and shadowy figures, and then by this they would take the arguments of the extreme right. So that's the one thing they can agree on, the Jews.
The Jews, that brings the horseshoe theory to life. The Jews as the unifying idea.
We always bring people together.
We do good work. Why are people saying such horrible things? That's my Jewish sense of humor.
Yeah.
That was my dark humor. Just clarifying.
That's good. I like it. But then the question gets asked, well, what do you want us to do? Right? If we're traitors when we're in your country, and we're genocidal maniacs when we're in our country, and it's essentially a criminal organization, then what do you want us to do? Disappear, I guess, right? So you would get different answers depending on who you ask. But essentially, now that you see, we can say the return of Christian anti-Semitism also recently, that people are using their faith as a basis for, let's just say, Jew bashing, okay, anti-Semitism essentially. What you and I would call anti-Semitism, but they might not, right? And also in the Muslim world, they have different reasons. I'll give you another example. As far as the Christians go, do you know, think about it. Why were Jews even allowed to live under Christianity during the Middle Ages and all that, hundreds of years? Why? The Muslims weren't allowed to live under the Christians. So why the Jews?
Why?
The reason is that the Jews remind you as a Christian and show you what happens to the people who have been abandoned by God.
Wow. The example.
Yeah, and that was the mainstream belief of why this should be allowed. And this is also a case, we think of it as offensive, but it's actually, quite tolerant. At least you don't kill us, right? For the time, it's not that bad. So it's not that bad. But when the Protestant Reformation came along, Martin Luther, actually, Martin Luther, the guy who started the Reformation, he had a different notion. And I don't remember the exact argument, but for him, the argument of keeping the Jews as, people who show you what happens, that's a false argument, and you can just burn their places and drive them off the land. So there was, here we can see as the start of a theological dispute about what is our relationship with the Jews as Christians, right? One side would say, just let them be here, or, just let them be, poor and ugly and disgusting, and, that's fine by us. And the other side that would develop would claim, no, we have no reason to have them here. right? They're only corrupting us. So kick them out, burn their stuff, drive them out. That's literally what he said. Drive them out. But then another view developed, the view that's called, and that has popularized Zionism in the United States, I must say. It's called dispensationalism. Have you ever heard about that, Frida? Right. So the main view of Christians is that the covenant between, if we're going into Old Testament stories, and again, we're not, you don't have to be a religious person to accept or not accept this. I'm only explaining the story and how the narrative is structured. So you could be, there was a covenant in the Old Testament between Israel, right? What's called Israel, and God. So there are two ways that the Christians interpret that today. One view is called the covenantal view. And that says, that's by the way, the view of the Catholic Church, for example. That says that Israel today is the church. The covenant has switched because the covenant has been fulfilled and changed by Christ, by the sacrifice on the cross. And thus, the church is the new Israel. The covenant is between God and the church, which is now Israel. And when I say the church in this sense, it could mean the Catholic Church, but it could also mean what is called the body of Christ, like all the believers. Okay, so that's one interpretation. The other interpretation, which is slightly newer, is called dispensationalism, which means that nowhere does it say that the promise has been revoked. And so there is a new covenant, there is a New Testament. By the way, in Hebrew, the name of the New Testament is Habrit HaChadasha, which literally translates to the New Covenant, if you were to translate it. Okay, so there is another covenant with the Christians, but the covenant with the Jews did not expire, and thus the Jews are still God's chosen people. So you have these... you used to have these two competing views of what do we do with the Jews. Today you have these competing views of what do you do with the Jews. What are the Jews? Are the Jews, as a believer, do I think that they're God's chosen people, or do I think that they have been abandoned by God because they did not accept Jesus?
What did you call it? Dispensationalism?
Yes, dispensationalism is the view that Israel is still chosen, and covenantal thinking is the opposite, that Israel is now the church.
I see. So those Christians who believe that are Zionists essentially are dispensationalists. Is that what you're saying? Those who believe that Israel is the land that was promised to the Jews and are actually very strong Zionists often. There's very strong Zionist Christians.
Yes. And the thing is that there used to be this thing that was like the most powerful, the most popular educational Bible in America. It was called the Schofield Bible. You might have heard of it. And what it was a King James Bible with notes for teaching and learning, right? With special notes. And so these notes were pushing people towards dispensationalist thinking, because it would clarify certain passages as here God means that he did not abandon Israel, and here God means blah, 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 right?
I see.
And today, if you've ever heard prominent anti-Semites today, they are saying that the Schofield Bible is essentially a Zionist plot to control.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They say it was funded by the Rothschilds and that it was a Zionist plot to brainwash America, essentially.
Wow. Okay. Were you in the middle of a thought, or can I ask you other questions? No.
Go on.
Yeah. What were you saying? I don't know if our reception is a little problematic, that by the time I'm done talking, you seem to be hearing me.
Or maybe it's my thought that's a bit slow.
That's okay. That's okay. We can take our time. We can adjust as needed. My question, there are a couple things that I'm really interested in this conversation. First of all, it's really interesting to look at how different philosophies and religions gave rise to different ways of looking at these people who were a minority in their midst, like the Jews in the Middle Ages. But also, something I'm interested in pausing and defining for a minute is the concept of conspiracy theory, because I feel that that's very relevant in our contemporary culture. The concept of what is actually conspiracy theory. Epstein, are we even allowed to talk about that? Is that like that was part of this for years? There's been very negative connotations to conspiracy theories, to the point that the mainstream media would deride anyone who talked about Epstein, and then suddenly the mainstream media no longer called it a conspiracy theory. So I'm wondering, how would you define a conspiracy theory?
Okay, so I'm guessing literally, if we were to think what a conspiracy theory is, there is the colloquial use, which means like a theory that involves a conspiracy that is highly unlikely to be true, right? That's like the colloquial use. But I guess the literal use would be the belief, the theory, right? The belief, the theory that you have about some conspiracy going on. And that would make it seem less outlandish, because you could say that everything is a conspiracy theory. Like I could go to the Middle East and point you at like 100 conspiracy theories right now. But in the colloquial use, we normally think that it's something done by the government, like in a shady way, right? This is what we mean when we say conspiracy theories. So, I don't know, and I gotta say, I don't know that much about the Epstein story. I know that it exists, so but I wouldn't be able to be that helpful about it.
Well, let's not talk about Epstein then. Let's talk about in general, because I think fundamental to anti-Semitism as it exists in certain circles today, and I think particularly in the right-wing part of the like underground, are conspiracy theories. And um, I think the question is, where is the line? I like finding or trying to articulate a line where there's oftentimes a fuzzy line. So let's say what's anti-Semitism was something you've just made even more fuzzy in a way. Likewise, what is a conspiracy theory? If someone says to you, the Jews all, like Nick Fuentes, the Jews all have all the power, they control Hollywood, they control the White House, at which point do you personally, as a thoughtful person, do you say, this is a valid idea, I will engage with you on the possibility that you're right? At which point do you say, this is a conspiracy theory and I am not engaging with you?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. It seems to me like in America, where free speech is so important, it seems to me like you should always engage, I have to say.
If someone says to you, okay, I totally believe the world is square or whatever, flat. I don't think many people think it's square, but I think some people think it's flat. If someone says that to you and says, Doran, listen to me, I'll explain to you why it's flat. And
Hmm.
5 minutes in, you notice they're a total nutcase. Like their explanation. At which point do you say this is a conspiracy theory, or do you say to yourself, I need to give this a chance and listen to it?
I think the framing here is I would not think to myself, by the way, that was a brilliant analogy. I don't think I would say to myself, this is a conspiracy theory, I shouldn't engage. I would probably say to myself, this person is crazy and I shouldn't engage.
Uh,
Right. So
uh,
my problem is not the conspiracy theory. My problem is the person.
I see. That's an interesting distinction. Because, for instance, during COVID, I felt very strongly that we needed to have a conversation about if lockdowns were the right course of action. And I didn't think I was a conspiracy theorist for it at all. Like, to me, it was very clear that there was a public health crisis, and the actions that were taken were very, very radical. And I thought it was necessary to discuss if that was the right course of action. And I got really, really flamed, and it left me with a very confused or difficult feeling towards conspiracy theory as a concept, which I think is something I struggle with all the time. I ask myself, when am I just dismissing, this person's a nutcase, a conspiracy theorist? And when do we have to engage? And the place in which it's relevant is if someone says, well, the Jews have all that power or something like that. Where do you go from there with that?
1 second, I just want to go back to your COVID analogy. I think most sane people, unless they were highly politically motivated, would agree to debate you on that issue. And if they didn't agree, I think there was something wrong with them, I must say. But they would be correct to write you off as a nut job if you were to say, not only right, the lockdowns are too much, blah blah blah, and also they just want to inject us with this thing because they're injecting chips into our skin, and this way they can try. No, but it matters.
But maybe it's true. See, I don't believe it, but maybe it's true.
Yeah, it could be true, but there seems to be some line that when it's crossed, you say, like, my problem is not with the conspiracy theory. My problem is that this person is likely paranoid, or that he has some problem, and I shouldn't engage with him. Like, I don't say that he belongs in jail, essentially, but I don't need to waste my time on that.
Yeah. That's exactly, it brings me back to the Epstein files, because when I heard of the Epstein killed himself again and again, I was like, conspiracy theories. I feel guilty doing it because it was done to me. But then these people were proven right, essentially. So I think central to the conversation about how Jews are discussed today is the question of how can we have conversations about different people, and what is a conspiracy theory that is like not worth engaging with?
I don't know. I would have to talk to a rabid anti-Semite for that. I have to be honest. Like, I have only one example of one such case. I had a conversation with a person who during our talk suggested some things that sounded kind of Nazi to me. Okay, they sounded kind of Nazi adjacent. He floated a bunch of ideas about how, the Jews control the White House and stuff like that. And I was explaining to him why I think that he is mistaken. It was a civil debate, and he kind of accepted my answer. So I thought to myself, okay, so he's not crazy. He's just heard it so often, and now that he has to think about it, he abandons these notions. But later, when we got off the air, he told me, well, Doran, can I tell you something? Sure. And he told me that his brother is actually has been in prison for like 20 years, and that his brother joined a neo-Nazi gang in prison, and that his brother has become obsessed by the Jews and doesn't ever stop talking about the Jews. And then I thought to myself, so this is how he got his ideas. I didn't just think these were Nazi ideas. He literally got them from Nazis. So think what happens now when Nazi ideas are widespread on the internet, on YouTube. And I have to tell you, Frida, I don't know if anything can be done about it, because they do have a point, right? Because it depends. When you say Jews control Hollywood, okay, what do you mean by that? Because you could just say there are a bunch of prominent Jews. Let's say that I'm the conspiracy theorist and I'm telling you Jews control Hollywood, okay? You ask me what I mean. And I'll tell you, Hollywood is essentially, all the big studios are run by prominent Jews, okay? And this might be correct. I don't know what the status in Hollywood is today, but I know that it certainly used to be correct. It might be correct still to this day. So I might say this. But the line is crossed here. If I believe that these Jews, okay, for this to be a problem, we would have to believe that these Jews are essentially loyal to their own kind and not to me, not to my group, but to their own group, and that they are using their power and their influence to advance certain goals that benefit their group and not my group. And not only do they benefit their group, they are actually harming my group, right? So saying that the Jews control Hollywood is not enough. You need that extra hidden assumption of a conspiracy that's going on, a literal conspiracy in the literal sense. So are the Jews push. Do I believe maybe I'm a Muslim in the United States, and I believe that the Hollywood Jews are pushing Zionist agendas? Or maybe I'm a right-wing extreme anti-Semite, and I believe that the Jews who control Hollywood, they're pushing open border policies, right? And they're trying to subconsciously influence the American to, have less children. They would say become LGBT, destroy the structure of the family, and so when I'm confronted with that, I ask myself, so wait, it can't be both, can it? It can't be both. So which one is it? By the way, the Nazis, again, I go to the Nazis, they said the exact same. The Jews are loyal to themselves. They are pushing, they wouldn't call it LGBT back then, but they have this famous story about a sex change clinic that was opened by a Jew in Berlin, and how the Jews were destroying the structure of the family, and how they had like these sexual abomination bars or pubs in which they would promote their deviancy. So this is becoming, by the way, people are trying to push this narrative again today. When they're retelling the story of the Second World War, they're trying to retell it in a different way, which makes the Nazi action defensive. For example, another example that people use for world Jewry, there was, I think it was in the late 30s or in the mid 30s, there was a declaration of war by Judea on Hitler. This is what the newspapers said. What it meant was that Jews worldwide were upset at what was going on in Germany at the time. I think it was before the war actually broke out, but still Jews were concerned, and they boycotted Germany. They boycotted German goods. And then the press said Judea declares war on Germany. And thus, if you were to ask a neo-Nazi today, who declared war on who first? They would say the Jews. They would cite this. So again, it everything depends on how you tell the story. And yeah, and again, they have a point. They do have a point. Like the Nazis would also say the communists were Jews. And again, it comes up today. Were the communists, were they Jews? Well, the Jews were disproportionately represented by in the communist movement. And you could also come up with social factors for this, right? For example, you might say it's because the Jews were the one group that had the most to gain from abolishing all distinction between people, right? That's essentially what communism is. Like the only thing that matters is that I belong to the correct class, and then I can be like everyone else. So it makes sense that the Jews would be there. That's one explanation. Another explanation you could give if you're a Nazi would be it's in their blood, or somehow they're genetically predisposed to be communists. Or you could say, if you are a modern anti-Semite, a modern Nazi, they would not take the racial route mostly. What they would say is that the Jews were just looking for an excuse to murder Christians. And then they would say, tell us about how the communists, the Bolsheviks, murdered millions of Christians, and they would call that the biggest genocide ever, and they would emphasize this to make it bigger than the Holocaust, right? By the way, they would also deny the Holocaust, but just in case they don't, they also make it like the first genociders were actually the Jews. They started it against Christians or against white people. So you could... Where I think someone has lost the plot is when he is presented with several explanations of something. Instead of picking the one that seems most plausible, he would always pick the one that fits his extreme ideology. Or he has never even considered these options, which is also suspicious.
The idea that I think this is a very good distinction when you'll often present a scenario. I'm trying to think. Let's say I show videos of Hasidic women covering their heads, and the most likely explanation for or judgment for this custom is to say, well, the majority of Westerners judge these women for covering their heads, and some people don't. The conspiracy theorist will, or the anti-Semite, I don't know that I would use the word anti-Semite, the person predisposed to kind of judgment about the Jews will immediately jump to see the Jews are allowed to cover their heads and Muslims get criticized. I see this all the time where it's like, why would you jump to that reading? Where did you go from seeing a minority group with a special clothing garb to reading into that as proof that Jews get special privilege? You've made so many assumptions in the middle, like saying Muslims would never be allowed to do that. What are you talking about? It's New York City. We see people in hijabs all the time. So I find it interesting the way people will take their ideology and impose it on tiny bits of information without at all considering the more probable explanation, which is that this is a city or a country where a diversity of religious observances are tolerated. And it's not a special privilege for Jews, it's simply an approach towards minorities. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Here's what I want to ask you, like as we're winding it down to our hour, something that I actually struggle with. You're a secular person, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I have no idea. You want to explain your own so I don't work off assumptions and am guilty of what I accuse others of doing?
I don't know what I would define myself as, so just go on your assumption and I'll go with it.
You'll clarify in the answer. Okay. Here's what I was going to ask. I know a lot of religious people who will say, well, anti-Semitism is back. It's always been there. It is a fixed plight of the world. And we don't have to ask why it's back. It's always been there. It will always be there. And that's the end. For me, as someone who sees the world, I think, in a less religiously predestined way, that answer doesn't satisfy. I'm like, well, we're all people. Some people will carry more prejudice in their hearts than others. For instance, there will be sexism always, some people more so, some people less so. There will be anti-Semitism more so and less so, but sometimes it will be worse. And the reason for it to be worse will be explainable and definable, and you can find it in the cultural context. In other words, things can be understood. A rise in anti-Semitism should be understood, in my view, from the perspective of a geopolitical context that causes increased anti-Semitism. When you see anti-Semitism on YouTube, do you ask the question of why is it getting worse? Why is anti-Semitism getting worse? Or is that not a question you ask?
I sometimes wonder about it. I can think of a variety of possible explanations. Of course, geopolitics could be involved. But you have to remember that there is let's put it this way, there's a vast literature to pull upon. There's a history of this. So it's very easy to just go to old ideas which we think were completely unfounded. For example, the Nazi hatred of Jews, right? So we view it today as completely debunked. But really, when we look at how the conversation is around us today, we can say, yeah, the racist factor of it has been kind of completely debunked, right? Almost nobody brings that up. But the same ideas are still coming back, right? They have a vast array of literature to draw upon. And the same goes for Muslim anti-Semitism or Christian anti-Semitism. Although I must say, like, I do not consider, well, maybe it's a bit late in the interview to say that, but I do not consider Christianity as a whole to be anti-Semitic necessarily. Okay, and of course, the Catholic Church is firmly against it. We can talk about that. That's a different topic. But
firmly against what?
Anti-Semitism. They had a whole meeting called Vatican II. They put out a document. I think it was in the 60s. The document was called Nostra Aetate, and it kind of redefines the relationship between the Catholic Church and Jews. Mm-hmm. And it also ends trying. It puts an end to trying to convert the Jews and saying that they're a part of God's plan and blah 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 and all that. That's a whole other spiel. So I do not consider Christianity as a whole as an anti-Semitic religion. But if I were a Christian anti-Semite, I have a vast historic literature to draw upon. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So this is what I'm trying to say. Like, it could be, and if I do believe that Jews kind of run things behind the scenes, I have literature to draw upon. Yeah. And I can go back and say, hey, this guy also thought this way, and he might have had a point. Maybe Hitler was a good guy. And if we were also, I think you cannot neglect to mention this, but say, okay, let's say that we have a glass of water, okay? And you take a little bit of apple juice and you sprinkle it into your glass of water, okay? Is the average color of the water going to change?
Yes. From a little bit of apple juice, yes.
Yes, necessarily it's going to change, right? The more you add, the more it will change. But by definition, once you add some, it will change. The same goes, I'm sorry to say, but the same goes for immigration from Muslim countries. If you were to have a society that harbors extreme hostility towards Jews for the past 100 years, at least, probably more. There were some better times, but yeah. Okay, extreme animosity. There was animosity even before that, but it became extreme and bloody and violent for about 100 years. Okay, if you were to import these people into your country, would Jew hatred on average rise, decrease, or remain the same? Of course, it would rise. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you were to import people from countries in which Mein Kampf is a bestseller, and in which the biggest and most successful history YouTube channels in Arabic tell you the history of World War II, and they tell it from a Nazi perspective, literally. They tell it from a Nazi perspective about how the Nazis waged war against the Jews. And they get, well, what do you think you're going to get? These ideas will circulate.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that. I'm open to hearing from, I don't keep up with things like that very much. When I hear ideas like this, I'm listening. I had Izzy Posen on my show, and he talked about immigration in the UK causing a rise of anti-Semitism. And that interview got quite a few very angry comments from people who are on the left, who are very, very frustrated or outraged by this insinuation, which I'm hearing from you as well. And I think Izzy's coming from the right. I'm not sure. I mean, we're putting everyone in boxes, but I feel like to some degree it's helpful. So I just want to pause here and hear, like, where do you see this argument that you're making coming from in terms of the spectrum of the political world, and how do you feel about how the left responds to it?
So I gotta say, I wasn't trying to make a political argument. That's why I gave the example of the glass of water and the apple juice, right? I mean, necessarily, once you add something that is different than the average into the average, then the average will change.
But what you were saying essentially was that Muslim countries have a high prevalence of anti-Semitic.
Oh, that's a fact.
Okay, you want to talk more about that, like how that is like received, or how do you stating this as a fact in contemporary discourse, how people respond to it, and how you handle the discussion?
So, of course, in American politics, the mere mention of this fact would be considered right-wing, right? But I would like to qualify that. And by the way, I don't see myself as a particularly political person, but I know some history. And I know that Arab countries and Muslim countries as a whole, not all of them, but almost all of them, with the exception of, I don't know, Kosovo, which we can get into, but they have a very, very heavy animosity towards Jews. We can think of, for example, well, all the way back to the Second World War, right, in which the religious figure Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, that was his role at the time, he called for a jihad against the British and the Jews, both, right, the British and the Jews. And there was the famous Farhud massacre in Iraq at the time. Iraq, I remind you, had a Jewish population not from after the Bar Kokhba revolt, not from after the destruction of the Second Temple, but since the Babylonian exile. Okay, there have been Jews living in Iraq for, what is it, 2,500 years, something like that, and these people were like that massacred, like that, in 1 second. When the Jews of Iraq, when Israel was established, these Jews were seen as Zionist collaborators, which, by the way, the Jews of the United States are also increasingly being viewed as. Okay, so they were seen as Zionist collaborators, and the Iraqi government opened like a window of time in which a Jew can say, "Well, I'm leaving to Israel. Okay, we will let you leave. Fine, you can leave." But then, when they closed the window of application, or no, towards the closing of that application window, they passed another law that said that anyone who has applied is actually not allowed to leave with anything. So again, you have no property. Your home, your stuff, you can't take anything with you, maybe a suitcase, but like you're done. All your stuff now belongs to the state. And mind you, this is before Hussein. This is before Saddam Hussein. This is the Hashemite family that rules Jordan today. So this happened. And now people today, Muslims today would say, well, this only happened because the Zionists have conducted false flag attacks against Jews in Iraq, like against their own people in Iraq, to get the Iraqi Jews to turn on the Iraqi government, right? There's always an explanation. But so this is the Iraqi Jew experience. And by the way, they all left. Pretty much all of them left. There are no Jews in Iraq today. And this was like one of the largest communities ever. So so maybe the Zionists, the evil Zionists were involved. Okay, maybe they were. But are we really to believe that not a single one was left? And like it was such a pleasure to live over there. The people loved them and accepted them so much. There was no anti-Semitism at all. No, well, they wouldn't call it anti-Semitism, right? But there was no anti-Semitism at all. It was great. It was perfect. Same goes for Egypt, by the way. There are no Jews in Egypt, almost no Jews. Morocco, Libya, all these places. There were a million Jews. Why none of them are left over there? So I think that's a pretty strong argument in favor of these societies being very hostile towards Jews. And I have to remind you that these Jews were not Zionists to begin with. Today, by the way, they are the base. Their descendants are the base of the right wing political power in Israel. Yeah. So, but these people were not Zionists. They were Arabized Jews. But this wasn't enough.
Interesting. Wow, thank you for answering this. I feel like it's such a delicate conversation, but personally, I these are like important questions for me. It feels like you're not allowed to talk about it to some degree, but for me, it's important to have these discussions. So we were talking about the rise. You were giving the answer, and I want to wrap up our interview. I wonder if you have any other thoughts on the rise of anti-Semitism besides for the apple juice analogy.
I think it's a mix, right? I think it's many different factors going into one. First of all, you have so it's like an interaction between many different things. You have this going on. You have the way in which we conduct our conversations online, on X or on Facebook, and that space being highly susceptible to outside actors, be it organic or inorganic, right? So these things can also influence our conversation and maybe add a few ideas that might have been fringe, but now generate a lot of traction because they're sensational, right?
Do you believe that Iran is, for instance, pushing, funding bot ideas, like that kind of thing?
I not only do I believe that, I know that, but not so much Iran, more China and Russia. They are more powerful with it, but they would be aligned with Iran in this particular case. Yes, we can tell. We have people that can monitor these sorts of things, and we know that there are in fact bot farms, and you can think to yourself, by the way, that you. Think as a congresswoman, for example. Let's say you're a congresswoman and you post something about something criticizing Israel. Okay. And suddenly you discover that you're getting a hell of a lot more likes and reposts and shares. Now, this could be entirely artificial, done by outside actors. But what do you learn from that as a congresswoman?
To do it more.
And what do other people watching you learn? Also to do it more, right? So it could, so it's a lot of different things. And of course, it's also the fact that there has been a substantial effort by the geopolitical enemies of Israel to portray it at a very, very, very negative light, with the Gaza war especially, right? This was a very strong catalyst for all of this. And again, war is not great, right? Nobody loves war, but the war in Sudan wasn't pumped that hard into Western news feeds and social media feeds, right? And arguably, it was way worse. Same with Yemen. Now, you could bring up all sorts of arguments, like normally people would say, yeah, but we do not fund Yemen and we do not fund Sudan, and we're not allied with these countries, but we are allied with Israel, so it should be held more accountable. That might, fine, I'm not arguing with that if that's what you want to claim, but my claim would still hold true, that it's been pushed way harder and way more. As a geopolitical tool, by the way, as a tool of force by countries. And by the way, that's not even a new thing. That's not even new. Genghis Khan even used to do it to his enemies, even before he was a great conqueror. Like, he would spread the rumors about the emperor of, what was it? I think it was the Jin dynasty, like the dynasty that controlled northern China at the time, right? And then these rumors would be pushed all the time, and, you know, to shake his legitimacy or something like that. Everybody does it. It's a part of warfare. Not all warfare is fought with tanks and rifles.
It's depressing because war, we imagine, is a very clear-cut thing. We know what it is. And when it permeates and bleeds into our perception of reality, that robs us of our ability to know what's real and what's not. And that's so destabilizing and so disruptive to just our sense of our trust with each other in conversation. It's for me, it's very frustrating that a lot of people imbibe what we can call propaganda, and then you're trying to have a conversation, and so much of it is shaped in these artificial contexts, or even if it's shaped by mainstream media, it's often like so much someone else shaping your perception of reality, and then we're trying to have a discussion off of almost an artificial reality.
Yeah, well, I guess you could call war a spectrum. It's a spectrum. It doesn't have to go as von Clausewitz, like the premier military theorist of the West, would say, war is just the continuation of policy by other means.
I see. I like that. I hear what you're saying. I get it. My final question, and then we'll wrap up. To which degree do you feel that having these conversations in a climate in which so much of what we say can be weaponized is something you are anxious about?
So I'm actually not anxious at all about that. I'm you know, I generally not an anxious person. I just say what I think. Yeah.
That's great. How do you do it? Teach me.
Oh, well, have you heard of Marcus Aurelius?
No. Oh, I think I have.
Yeah, we can discuss it later if you want, or now, whatever you prefer. But yeah, I read it every once in a while, and I feel like after maybe it's also a part of getting older, but I've become like very good at separating what is up to me and what is not up to me.
I like that. Almost Buddhist.
Buddhist is detachment, right?
I see.
Is to be detached from the things that are happening around you. Well, I guess there are some similarities, but also I would have to say that I am not anxious about this being taken out of context, but I also don't think that these kinds of conversation help.
I see.
Like they do help, but it's like that. It's like such a small influence because most people, they just already decided what camp do they belong to, and they will act according to that. But maybe we made a little bit of a difference, and I hope we did that.
Well, the truth is, my philosophy about this is I'm not here to dissuade anyone who is an anti-Semite of their views. It's just not something I care about talking to these people and convincing them. But I do feel strongly about my own right to clarity and the right for those of us who live in this confusing world to understand what's happening around us, just to have a better understanding of the issues in the world.
Well, that's the story of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for adding a piece to that story. I really enjoyed talking to you. What can we say to the viewers to check out more of your work, your podcast? You keep it updated, sort of. I saw your last post was a month ago.
Oh yeah, well, I haven't posted in quite some time. Maybe I should hurry up. Actually, I'm more active on my Hebrew channel, but I should. For this interview, it deserves a post on my English channel as well.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. So you're popular in Hebrew circles doing for an Israeli audience content.
I guess you could say that. Yeah.
What would you say to summarize what your content is about really quickly?
Oh, I just talk about what I'm interested in. It's usually philosophy, psychology, geopolitics, history, sometimes just YouTube stuff. That's kind of what I'm into.
Me too. I'm also into just YouTube stuff. The other things I don't know. Well, thank you so much, Doran. I really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you also to the viewers on YouTube and the podcast listeners as well. And bye-bye.